Welcome back, or welcome to, ladies and gentlemen, Battle Hardened, America's Backbone. I am your host, Samuel Markley. Today I have my co-host, Avery Davis, with me. He's an ETSU graduate and military historian. And today, our topic is going to be working with the 25th Infantry Division in the Vietnam War. And last episode, we went over the overview of what they did during their time in Vietnam and some of the just basic outline of what they did. Today, we're going to be going in deeper into the certain operations we did. So I did my research. Avery Davis did his, and so we'll just get going. All right. So Operation Blue Light. This was the first this was the first operation the 25th was involved with in Vietnam. Uh, so basically, it was the largest airlift mission in the U.S. Army up to this point. So what they did is they got on 231 C-141 planes, and I did a little bit of extra research, and these planes are bigger than most commercial airplanes. So imagine riding in on one of those into a hostile zone. You're not just sneaking in, okay? So I think it's very very impressive of what they were able to do, and it was a successful mission. Avery, if you'd like to add anything.
Yeah, I mean these planes were state of the art at the time. They were first commissioned in 1965. They were like brand new technology by the time this started. You know, when you think of dropping stuff in before, there were just not planes this big. And if anything was being dropped, it was not in this amount. So going back to like the really size of how big this operation was, this was brand new technology being put into play, and they were able to be very successful with that.
Yeah, definitely. It's this was such a hardcore, division throughout all of history since they came to in 1941 when they started World War II, and it just shows just how impressive of a feat that they were able to carry out from the beginning of Vietnam. So next we'll move on to Operation Attleboro. So this was at the time one of the largest, if not the largest, major unit operation. Up to that date, of course, now we've had larger, but up to that date, and that's a very impressive feat. And yet again, and their main goal here, and they were very successful in doing so, is they were focused on the Ninth Viet Cong Division, and they wanted to just establish a firm victory and get their way into Vietnam, and show them what it means to be American. What we're fighting for. So again, just another very impressive operation that they were able to go for.
Yeah, so with Attleboro, there's actually just a whole this is one of like the growing pains to start Vietnam. And Vietnam was by no means a success, but when you start looking into it at Attleboro, this is the first time that we really have exposed command and control weaknesses early in the war. The 25th Infantry Division, if you look into like the interwar period right after Korean and before going into Vietnam, these guys were kind of trained small scale combat. They did a lot of missions in Okinawa, like training missions and stuff. And when they get there, it seems like all these units that were put together at Attleboro just ended up being kind of disoriented. So this is like that, like, okay, we realize we got a leadership problem. And so to even though it was a tactical success for the US, there was still a lot of things to be learned from this. One of the cool things about Attleboro is like the attack of the largest Viet Cong supply depot during the war. They had enough rice stored there to feed 13,000 troops for a year and just many weapons and stuff. So this was a really strategic point early on. You want to destroy the enemy's ability to wage war. That's what they came in set to do. And this was that first point of trying to do that.
Yeah, and I also think it's interesting that this is one of now, of course, throughout all early military history, we have flanking and everything, all those military strategies that were is really smart. But at Alboro, we really put into effect the search and destroy method, which is basically like flanking, but it it just try. I mean, you're just trying to wipe them out at that point. Basically, what if you look up the textbook definition of a search and destroy mission, it's where the military goes into a hostile territory. They just search for the enemy, they attack them, and then they leave. It's just a bang bang kind of thing. So again, there's just nothing short of impressive that the 25th, and not only the 25th, the all of America's military, but it's crazy when you go into the detail of all these little operations that led into such a big, you know, obviously the Vietnam War. Everybody knows about it, right? So next we have Operation Yellowstone. This one's actually cool. If you go to the 25th Infantry site, you can actually watch video footage of parts of Operation Yellowstone. But basically, this mission was where they were trying to break apart like the Viet Cong forces and lines near the Cambodian border. Um, they really established heavy fire bases and put together again search and destroy missions. You're going to see that a lot in Vietnam, where you just go in and try to wipe them out as quick as you can and get out of there. Especially with jungle warfare, you do not want to stay in there longer than you have to. They faced constant heavy fighting during all of it. The Viet Cong was um, definitely strong. They weren't afraid to die, and they put that like motto pretty much at the forefront of their minds, and they do anything it took. And America had to go in and face all that constantly, and 25th Infantry right in the middle of it all, pretty much. And at the kind of just wrapping up Yellowstone, they did face heavy casualties, but it was seen as a very highly successful mission. So, Avery, if you want to add anything.
Yeah, the Operation Yellowstone is very interesting. You've got past like the beginning of the war there, that newness that we talked about. The 25th Infantry Division is where the 3rd Brigade is kind of going to earn its stripes in a way. They did a lot of combat there. Two of the big things with that 3rd Brigade were the establishing and defense of fire bases Burt and Beauregard. These were big artillery points that were quite important to the U.S. Operations going on there. You also had the 2nd Battalion of the 22nd Infantry, who isn't our focus, but working in conjunction with a lot of the 25th Infantry. And like you said, this is just some heavy fighting in harsh conditions. There's jungle fighting, there's patrols, there's a lot of footage out there, or more so recordings actually, of attacks on different scouting platoons, things like that. So yeah, this is just one of those like first, you know, hard hitting moments. Even though it was considered a success, it was just such a big hit on the 25th, and like I said, they really kind of earned those stripes here.
Yeah, and that's kind of what you see throughout all of Vietnam. Like there are, successes and everything that we can look back, and it's mostly like tactical success. There was heavy casualties through all of it. And it's like in wars, you have times where certain armies or certain regiments are just dominant, and they don't face much repercussions. But in Vietnam, it was just a harsh full circle. There were no good spots. It was if you're gonna go in and do your job, you're gonna have a lot of deaths, a lot of casualties. Um, but it's this was a basically based on like this war was basically tactical success, and everything else kind of just happened.
Yeah, and this was again like you got to remember where they're fighting. This is Warzone C, and so if you ever look at the map, Warzone C is right on the Cambodian border. I think this is about the time that my grandpa was kind of involved in Vietnam, up there near Cambodia. And this is just one of those hard zones. I mean, any war zone is going to be hard to fight in, but war zone C and D, had like the Iron Triangle in the middle, which is a really strategic point for the U.S. So being here, you are that line of defense for the Iron Triangle zone, and you have to be able to hold that border there in Cambodia.
All right, so I think that pretty much sums up the operation of Yellowstone. So at this point, we will go to an ad break.
Today's episode of Battle Hardened, America's Backbone, is brought to you by Black Rifle Coffee Company. Veteran founded, mission focused, and brewed for the bold. Back in Vietnam, our boys didn't have the luxuries we do now. What powered them in the jungle? A steel pot helmet, a pack of Lucky Strikes, and if they were lucky, a canteen cup of jet black coffee strong enough to strip paint off a tank. Fast forward to today, and we're still honoring that same fighting spirit. Black Rifle Coffee isn't just another cup of joe. It's roasted by veterans who know what it means to stay sharp, stay ready, and keep moving, just like our troops did in the mud, heat, and fire of Southeast Asia. So if you're the kind of person who respects grit, history, and a darn good cup of coffee, grab a bag of Silencer Smooth, AK-47 Espresso, or go bold with Murdered Out. Support a company that backs our veterans and drink the coffee that powers patriots. Black Rifle Coffee Company. Fuel your freedom.
All right, we're back from the we're back from the ad break. All right. So next on the list we have Operation Cedar Falls, another huge operation. Um, this undoubtedly one of the largest offensive operations of the war, and it still stands the test of time as such a large operation. Here, I mentioned the search and destroy tactic and everything in the past two operations. This one, the hammer and anvil operation or tactic, excuse me. But basically, this one is you take two forces. One pins down the enemy, gets them. It's basically distracting them, putting their focus on a certain point. And then the other force, you have the two. The other force basically encircles them, like flanking, like I mentioned earlier, and tries to just hit them hard and again wipe them out. That's all they were trying to do was just get the job done. You know, um, so we have the hammer and anvil. Um, Sweep and destroy the Viet Cong in the Iron Triangle, like we said earlier. The Iron Triangle, one of the biggest factors of the Vietnam War. And it's seen as a tactical success again, but they didn't fully wipe out the Viet Cong like their intentions were. But still, it's seen as a success.
Yeah, there's a lot of things here that you know, although it was a success and there's a lot of military stuff going on, this is where a lot of the other things that when you think about Vietnam, like they kind of come into play. You've got the discovering of tunnels
Yep.
being a thing here. There's a lot of like when you're sweeping those areas and trying to find ways to like get into that iron triangle and envelop it and stuff. Um, the Viet Cong were just on top of it with having those tunnels and caches everywhere, and that's part of that search and destroy operation thing. But one of the other interesting things here is when you look at this operation, the 25th was actually kind of critical in helping evacuate and resettle local citizens.
Yep.
I believe the village of Ben Suck was one of the large villages involved in that kind of thing.
And that
But when the fighting gets really heavy here, oh, go ahead.
fun fact to go along with that is that was actually the first time there was a like U.S. based operation to relocate. Of course, you had like times World War II, soldiers would go out of their way to help, but this was like the first time that there was a large operation put in place to relocate those citizens. Sorry for cutting you off there.
No, you're good, and you're right. I mean, this is the first this is like a relocation mission. Um, when the U.S. is cooperating with, I believe, some like Australian forces and stuff, they are helping evacuate those citizens and civilians of the South Korean area. Um, it was very controversial because it was like, no, we need to be fighting. We need to focus our efforts there. but this is kind of a shift towards humanitarian tactics. This is something that the U.S. is going to take, like, from the start of this operation. We're going to have operations all the way through, like, the war on terror and the Gulf War and stuff, to where we don't want local civilians to be impacted by what we're doing. So this is that first example that kind of leads into many future operations of protecting people.
Yeah, and I think that also goes hand in hand with how hard soldiers would take like this war in specific because before I'm not making any light of it. Like there's still definitely really bad things that go on in their lives and what they see and all that. But this is like you're seeing what this war is directly doing to the people that call that place their home. All just the civilians who have really they have nothing to do with it, but they're stuck in the middle, and that kind of just puts another side, like another like point of view to the war. It's not just you're fighting, but you're trying to win, but at what cost?
Yeah, you can't just go in and just destroy everything and be like, oh, yep, everybody's dead. All the supplies are, gone. We have done our job. That's not the way that the U.S. views stuff. And this is kind of the start of U.S. When you start looking into like counterterrorism and stuff. Even though these are not really terrorist examples, it's still where the U.S. draws a lot of doctrine from. One of my mentors was a brigadier general that helped write a lot of this stuff, and he said that when we were in Vietnam and doing these operations, that's how we started to look at when we were going to counterstrike somewhere, we wanted civilians to be safe. And a lot of that also comes from British doctrine and having some of those royal forces that worked with us throughout the world wars and this war.
All right. One other point I do want to make about Operation Cedar Falls. It's just a huge operation. You could talk about it for hours, but as you could with any factor of any war. But another big thing is they were trying to destroy Viet Cong infrastructure, and they did so. But they were trying to kind of keep like enemy forces contained, and destroying infrastructure was one way they could help work towards that effort. And they did destroy it, but many enemy forces still escaped. So there, you're kind of faltering between was it a success, was it not? If you look in history books, it'll say tactical success, but there's too many factors that go into pretty much any operation in the Vietnam War to really factor if it was a success, because there are always factors that could have gone much better and factors that could have gone much worse. So moving on to Operation Junction City is a big one. So basically, this was the largest single Allied operation in the Vietnam War, um, and it was a large-scale attack in both the air on the ground. A lot of the stuff we've been going over is boots on the ground contact, but this now there were like fighting going on in the air and the water and all of that. But this, we really see both air and the ground come into play for this one huge operation. And again, the goal of every operation they had was pretty much let's go in, sweep them out, let's get this thing done. But this time, what they truly did is they captured a lot um, of resources, land that they could use, get that terrain, and it showed. This is one of the like missions that truly showed how like dominant the U.S. can be in a multi-sided warfare.
Yeah, they go into this. This is still that War Zone C. The Tay Ninh province is most of War Zone C near the Cambodian border. The main goal here is to disrupt enemy operations in War Zone C, which we've already talked about. But they also believe this is where the central office for South Vietnam is. That's kind of like the headquarters for the Southern Viet Cong operations. They perform a lot of sweeping operations. The second and third brigades are very influential here. And there's just a lot of heavy warfare that goes on. but it's the largest airborne operation since World War II, which is kind of interesting because you start to see what we refer to as like the combined arms tactics, where you are combining different elements to participate in one goal. We think of D Day, an amphibious assault. We think, oh, yeah, they were rolling up on Johnson boats and they were dropping the 101st Airborne. This is kind of like the tactical comparison to D-Day for Vietnam. You've got the 173rd Airborne. The 25th is playing a big role on the ground. While there wasn't really boats coming in, there's still that ground support that's having to coordinate with the airborne groups. And really just an amazing feat of tactics pulled off here.
Yeah. And another just fun fact to throw out there is there were over 25,000 U.S. Troops that were pretty much involved in this. It's just a huge number of those troops that faced everything that this operation had to offer. Um, and it also showed that like the U.S. was very, and especially the 25th. You know, we're focusing on like them and what missions and everything they played a key factor in, and all of these missions we've talked about. They played a huge role in, and we're keeping on this like war zone C. That is where a lot of the heavy hitting in Vietnam was, and the 25th was right in the middle of it pretty much the whole time. The 25th, you know, if you do research on the 25th, pretty much in any war they faced, they have been one of the most like heavy hitting U.S. infantry divisions. They are pretty much always there in the fighting, and they're always able to carry out their operations. Um, so it's just a really cool division to talk about. This Operation Junction City also demonstrated the U.S. mobility and coordination that they were able to do, like you said, communication between air and land and all of that. It just truly showed that the U.S. was prepared and was ready to take on a we see the fronts in World War II, fighting in the Pacific and then fighting in the West with Germany and all that. But you're fighting two fronts in the same front, basically, if you want to look at it that way. You got so many different things going on that you got to stay on top of, and the U.S. and the 25th specifically did really good at, keeping it at bay.
Yeah, and this is just how they were trained. Like I said, in between the war, these guys were doing some hardcore training in Japan. Like I said, along Okinawa and with other different Marine groups and infantry groups. These guys didn't stop. They were ready to do this kind of thing. This was what they trained to do: is provide intense support for groups. And this was, like I said, we talked about at the starting point. These guys were like focused on small scale battles and things like that. This is where they demonstrate that we are not just a small scale group. We are able to execute large scale, multi division operations, fighting in hostile terrain at the same time. They're able to coordinate. This is the first time that they really get to show that on that large of a scale and what their impact can truly be. These were guys that are Mr. Been there, done that. They did it all. So massive shout out to them for just being just absolute dogs, just wherever they were.
Yeah, exactly. Because you look at World War II, and I mean they were very involved in everything, but they were also joining up with a lot of other like divisions, corps to do whatever they needed to. But you have looking at the Vietnam War. At one point, the 25th consisted of 4 brigades, and 2 Alaskan battalions also joined the 25th, and they were from 1966 to 67. The 25th was the largest U.S. Army division, which is just crazy to look at. But it shows um, like how much of an impact they truly do have on U.S. military. We focus on the wars and everything, which is great. We learn about them, But when you truly take the time to dig into the divisions that, you know, like the 25th is a huge reason of why Vietnam went the way it did. You know, if we didn't have divisions like that, uh, much worse for us. But like I said, you focus on the wars and everything, but if you truly take the time to look at the division, it's just amazing to look at all the impact that, you know, like both of us, our grandfathers fought for the 25th in Vietnam, and puts it, it kind of puts it into real life. You look at war and all of these global like foreign relations and all that, and it's kind of just this like one big thing. But when you take it and break it down into the divisions and then like the soldiers that fought in it, it really brings it to real life, and you understand like the sacrifices that all these men made. But at the same time, they were just doing their job, and they did really good at it. You know, they had a lot of, like we've said before, you can't really measure success like in a war because you have so many casualties and all of that. But they truly, did their job and made sure that uh, you know it was carried out to however successful it could be.
Yeah, and I know like my grandpa, our family is always going to be heroes to us, but like when we like for both of us, like when we start to study like what they were doing over there and stuff, we see them in a whole different sense besides like, oh, my grandpa is a hero to me. Like we see like what they did for our country on that scale. These guys are heroes.
Yeah,
You know, some of them were injured for this cause and everything. I know my grandfather was. Um, his most prized possession actually is a coffee mug from Schofield Barracks, which is the 25th Infantry base in Hawaii. And he brought it back with him when he was injured. He was airlifted to Schofield. And that was like one of the things he grabbed with him when he came back out of his coma, and it's just had it ever since.
yeah, and like my grandfather, he was in Vietnam. I haven't learned too much like out of him from his time over there, but he's a Purple Heart veteran. He got shot basically like 2 inches from his heart, which is just crazy to think about. And so for that alone, the sacrifice makes him a hero. But recently, I talked to him a little bit about it, and there was actually another soldier with him in the 25th that jumped on top of him after he got shot, which is what saved my grandfather's life. And so that's two heroes in a division full of heroes, and an army full of heroes, and a nation full of heroes.
They're the backbone, I mean, just like we talk about, these guys are the backbone of a lot of operations in Vietnam. And without a backbone, you can't stand. So they're that important to us.
You know, exactly. I mean, it all boils down to who we have fighting for us. You know, we and they're just heroes. And a lot of times if you ask them, they'll say, "Well, I didn't really do that much." Like everybody that fought with me is just as much of a hero, if not more of a hero than I am. But every single person that serves is a hero because they all, no matter how big or small of an impact they truly make, it's huge, regardless of what they actually like do in the wars they fight in.
You
So
can't win a whole war with just one group of elite soldiers. It takes everybody.
yeah, because I mean, especially early war like the Vietnam. Like I know my grandfather was drafted. I mean, you have these dudes who never really saw themselves as let's go fight a war. But I mean, once you're thrown into it, you do what you're told and you do your job, and it hardens you. Um, the 25th is one of the like most battle hardened divisions because they faced so much, no matter what war they were fighting in or where they were fighting. They faced so much. I mean, you look back at World War II; they were right there in Pearl Harbor. I mean, their barracks got attacked during Pearl Harbor, They're just they stood the test of time as a division, and that's I mean I never really knew much of that. I knew my grandfather fought in the 25th. Once I really started looking into it, he was a part of one of the most dominant and hardened divisions in the U.S. military history.
Yeah, and that's the same thing. I mean, it goes for mine as well. I mean, a funny story. This is one of the things he told me was they were being attacked and they were ground forces, but they had to get evacuated and out of there. It was a rough situation all around. One of the like Huey helicopters had come in to get some of them, so it's landing, and a Viet Cong fires an RPG at the helicopter, and so he had grabbed up onto the skid of this Huey that's about, I mean, 6 feet in the air, able for him to like reach up, grab somebody, and climb up onto it. And while he is still there and that RPG is fired, they're 12 feet off the ground, rising in altitude. Um, he had like started to like swing up into the seat, and when it swerved, he fell back out and grabbed onto that skid. And he got up in there and swung into that helicopter seat. And he kind of smiles when he tells this story because even though it's dangerous, he proceeded to lean up there and cuss out the pilot just right there. Just dog cussed him just right there. And basically told him like, you don't need to move till I'm in here. And I mean, he just like lays it down on him. So just funny story, but everything they went through, these small actions like that, just like that one story, these were heroes that were fighting out there. There's multiple times where they could have died, and my grandpa fell off of that helicopter 12 feet. Maybe could have killed him. He could have been left behind. I don't know. Many more people could have been killed, maybe trying to save him, something like that. Everything they did had a danger component to it, but they are heroes.
Yeah, and it's a brotherhood. All divisions are, but when you look deep into the 25th, I mean, you got guys like if you go to the 25th website and everything, I mean, it tells you like how just much of a brotherhood it truly is to be a part of that, and you need that. If you don't have a true brotherhood, like in times of war, like you said, you get left behind and all that. But we really, it's just awesome. It's just really, really awesome that we can share stories like this, you know, and it's good that we can talk about it too. You know, we have the freedom to do so because of how they fought and everything. Anything else?
Do you know which like shoot, what was I going to say? Oh, like which brigade your grandpa was in?
Not sure. I may have known, but off the top of my head, I'm not sure.
Okay, I was going to say if you ever get into looking, the 25th website is pretty helpful when you look at things like that, and that brotherhood. There's actually like different like groups that these guys like still keep in contact with and stuff. So just a cool thing there.
Yep. All right. Well, I think that pretty much wraps up episode 4 of the Battle Hardened America's Backbone podcast. Thank everybody for joining us. Thank
It's been an honor to be here.
And then next episode, we will cover the 25th Infantry Division's role in the war on terrorism. So make sure you join us back for that. Again, thank everybody for coming. Thank you, Avery, for taking time out of your day to come talk with me and talk things out. I really think we broke a lot of it down, and I know I learned some. I'm sure you did too, and it was just a great time. So thank you.
No problem.
See y'all later.